So tonight, the topic is going to be on forgiveness, and I'll read a few scriptures. And then it's a little tricky of a class because how you talk to someone about forgiveness and the way in which you emphasize it depends a lot on what stage they're in. And you just say different things to different people. And I've said this before, but now that we've got people that are on the other side of the night, it's a trickier class to give because you say one thing to one group and you say another thing to another. You can actually contradict yourself depending on who you're talking to. So it makes it a little trickier. It's tricky. But let's start with some scriptures. I'll read them because I wrote them all down there from many places in the Bible. Things Jesus said about forgiveness. So this is Matthew 6:14. If you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive yours. Another one. Mark 11. Whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also who is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. And here's from Luke. If your brother sins, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times in the day and turns to you 7 times, you must forgive him. One more. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens, you have gained your brother. If he does not listen, take 1 or 2 others along with you, that every charge may be established. If he refuses to listen to them, tell the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and tax collector. Okay, so we can start again. Let me just make sure this is working so I don't screw up another video, which I tend to do. Okay, so I'm not sure how to go about this. So we know what God's trying to do with us, and we know what God's trying to do with humanity. So we're all being brought to the same place, which is infinite love and union with God, and that's God's pull. If I say this all the time, but people, you guys don't ask it ever, but people often ask, what is God's will for me? I just want to know God's plan for my life. And we already know. Like, I don't know what job you're going to work, but if you think that's the central thing for God's plan for your life, you're not on a spiritual path yet. So what is God's plan for your life? Well, it's union with God. That's God's plan. Like, that's God's plan. And we if we fall away and we lose our way on the spiritual journey, we think it's what partner will I end up with, or what job will I have, or I don't know what career choice. Those things matter. They're not nothing, but they're really not the point at all, because were you to be thrown in prison wrongly and spend the rest of your life behind bars, you could still attain union with God. So there's one thing that's God's will for sure, and all the rest is secondary. And the thing that's God's will for sure is we come to union. So anything Jesus says, you have to understand he's saying it from the context of if there's rules and regulations, if there's things we're not supposed to engage in, if there's things that are bad for society, it's it's based on this one criteria. Will it help us as a whole to come to love and come to joy and come to freedom, or will it hinder us from coming to love and joy and freedom? This is what the Bible cares about. It's what Jesus cares about. So he's now assuming forgiveness is essential. If you noticed, it's pretty big, and he's giving you a glimpse into the Trinity when he talks. He's giving you a glimpse into the way things are. It's not an opinion of some person. It's not that. He is standing in infinite life. He has infinite life in himself, and he knows the way to infinite life. So these things really, really matter. Okay, but it matters on a lot of levels. One person who's not here, I wanted them to be here. This happens a lot lately. Someone's really on my mind and they don't come. One person I think really, really, needs to forgive themselves. And their children are not forgiving them. Not forgiving them. And so how do you work that? How do you know when you should move on and feel free? How do you know what you should do when someone won't forgive you? How do you know? How do you know if you're forgiven with God? How do you know if these major roadblocks of anger and resentment and judgment are in the way in such a way that you're not going to make it to union? You want to know that stuff. This is what Jesus is revealing in these sections. So one of the things I want to say is the main thing God wants from us is to keep the flow of grace. So God is pouring grace down on humanity right now. Anyone who stops and pays attention will notice. They'll just notice if you just pay attention. And I would encourage you guys to measure over time, okay? How often are you paying attention? Just how often? Because as your love for God grows, I think it's hard in the first section of the path when it's all purification, because you're sort of flinching from God at the same time that you're trying to open to God. You're identified with your ego to such an extent that God can seem like a threat. So then I think that's the hardest stage to want to all the time be listening to God, because you don't necessarily want to hear what God's saying. I mean, it's just true. I went from, 10 years of never not listening all the time, at the end, 100% of the time, to, feeling pretty guilty that I did not want to tune in because I did not want to hear what God had to say. Just as soon as it became about deep purification, in like a lion, out like a lamb, that was me. A lion to a mouse, that was me. It's difficult, but so I know that can get in the way of a person who really loves God, but it's just it's intimidating. You don't always want to be shown what's in the way. You don't always want to be shown what's wrong. So one person said, could you just give us more breaks? And I get it. I totally get it. But so the point is this, though. God is always pouring grace down on us. Always pouring grace down on humanity. Never isn't doing it. And we've created it's like the flat earther dome. We've created a dome over ourselves and we don't receive it. And so one of the things God's concerned with is, are you receiving power from God all day long? Are you Christian in that sense? Are you connected to that power? Are you connected to it? Are you taking the time to connect to it? And then are you sharing it with the people around you? And I remember Clyde, he had, for some reason, he had to go back to work later in life. He had to get a job after retirement. I can't remember what happened with him as my first teacher, and he had to get a job. And he just needed a little money. So he got a job. He was a retired mechanic, didn't want to do mechanics. So he got a job driving a school bus for kids. And really, this is what he did. He got the bus, he got it ready. He said he would fill the bus with God's light. And every single child that walked on, he would give them God's light. And he said he would watch their behavior change over the season from being infused with God's light. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about grace, being a channel for God's love for real, remembering to be. Just even remembering to, we're so caught up in our own self. That's not the way, right? Self-centeredness isn't the way. So that's an example of what that looks like. So then if you're married or you have kids or you have parents, which is most of us, then there's always that temptation because we're so imperfect, because we make so many mistakes with one another, we hurt one another, we cause disorder, and then if that forgiveness isn't there, then that grace flowing into you is not flowing into them. And that grace flowing into them is not flowing into you. And so then that frustrates the work of salvation in humanity. It's all it's ever about. God's power healing the world. That's all it's ever about. God's power healing the world. And, it's not just individuals. I know one person at least whose primary resentment is not against any one person. It's against an entire group of people, and it's not political, just in case I know we're in divided times, so you might immediately jump to politics. It's not political at all, but just a group of people that are causing great harm in the world, and they really are, and inability at this point on that person's spiritual journey to forgive them, which leads to anger. And then the problem with that is anger, and you can't stay angry and come to love. You can't stay angry. And and it's the same if your parents have harmed you. Some of us are in a certain club where we were raised quite terribly. I'm amazed at some of you guys, how you were raised. You were raised so wonderfully. It's really neat. But some of us were raised really terribly. And, there's a club, and I'm in it. And there's a few of us in here that are in that club of raised just about, it's mostly harm that came your way. Not good, but mostly harm. And none of that is okay. None of that is all right. But if absolute forgiveness is not given on our part towards our parents, we can never, ever be whole. We can never be whole. We must. We must forgive absolutely. It doesn't mean it's all right. With my father, I forgave him before he passed. And I felt nothing but love in his presence. In fact, I felt an overabundance of grace in his presence for the 4 or 5 years I had with him before he passed on. And he had not yet changed. He was older and weaker, so he was less abusive. So that was nice. He didn't maybe have the energy to be so mean. But I had found that forgiveness, and anytime I was in his presence, I felt the Holy Spirit profoundly pouring love through me into our family. And if I hadn't done that, I would still be stuck in the wounds that he gave me. If I hadn't done that, I would still be wounded. I cannot be free of the suffering my parents gave me if I won't forgive. I must forgive them. And so okay, so all right. So then the other thing Jesus assumes here is that we need God's forgiveness. That we need it. And, in this world, it's so secular now. That could be a new idea to some people. Any notion that I actually need forgiveness. Working with one person who's not here, who comes from the New Age movement. And, his understanding of his sin is very warped. His take on sin is if he does something quite dastardly, it's an opportunity for those people to grow through what he did. And I said, it's a very warped part. It's a very convenient view, but not so uncommon in the New Age movement. As soon as you say everything's an illusion and none of it is really happening, it gets really easy to sort of dismiss things you've done. So this guy, if he does something, he doesn't really do dastardly things, but he's done some pretty intense things. And so quick to say, do you think this is an opportunity for them to forgive? And do you think I ought to tell them that? And I said, I was joking, half joking, only if you want to get strung up and hung off a tree. You don't get to be the one doing the damage and then say, hey, man, I'm glad I brought you this lesson. But you know what that comes from? We as we were discussing it, he saw. He said he wasn't. He was thinking of it in the New Age way, which is everything is perfect. Everything is happening exactly how it's supposed to happen. Which means all of that sin I did was meant to be. And that's not the view Jesus has. That's not the view Jesus has. Is it true that everything that happens is going to be okay in the end because of God's healing and grace? Yes, that's true. But do I need to beat my child so they can get their lessons? No. There's moral sin in that. That's my moral sin that I cause. And it matters. It really matters. Well, because I could just as easily not heap that suffering on them, not cause them that wound and that pain. So Jesus' understanding and the Christian understanding of sin and guilt and forgiveness is that first we have to recognize we really do cause harm. We really do. And some of us only cause me. I come from such a terrible background. I've caused a lot of harm to people through my suffering. And some of you guys would never, ever cause that kind of harm in your lives. You wouldn't. You don't have it in you to cause it. But we have to deal with that ugliness that is in us. We have to own it and deal with it truly. And if we don't, I was talking to one person who was a decent parent, but not the best parent, and her son won't forgive her. So okay, that happens. But she really did do harm. But she's willing not only to make amends, but to go to counseling or do anything that she can do to make that situation better between her and her child. That's about as good as it can get. That's all you can ask. And if the child won't then forgive, they're the ones then sinning. They're the ones then sinning. And you can see it in the scripture. Jesus says, if your brother sins against you and he won't see it, go and grab another person and go talk to him alone, then bring one person, then bring the church. And what are you trying to do? You're just trying to get this person to not squander their soul, to not squander their life in anger and resentment and hatred or sin. And then Jesus says, and if they won't hear the church, let them be to you like a Gentile or a tax collector. And that's interesting because, you hear Jesus, forgive, forgive, forgive. No matter what you have to forgive. If you read him carefully, he does still mean forgive, but it's a different kind. There's two kinds of forgiveness. One is the kind where you want to keep that person in your life. And you want to keep developing a relationship with that person long term. And you're going to communicate and they're going to sin again and again because, does anyone in here need to be told why? How you could see how hypocritical it is for us all the time in there with God saying, man, I'm really sorry. I'm so sorry. Once again, I find myself in this place. Once again, I find myself here. I just swore I would never come to this place again. And here I am, God. And help me. Just help. I'm sorry, man. You can't come to God like that and then choose not to forgive someone who's sincere. Or you won't experience that forgiveness. There'll be no way to experience it. So there's two kinds of forgiveness. There's the kind that they're sincere enough that you want to maintain a true connection with them. You want to. And they are sorry. They're healthy enough to have that connection with. And that's sort of how I know whether to keep someone close in my life or not. If they're not going to live, they don't have to be Christian, but if they're not going to live a certain level of principles, I don't want to be their friend. It's not about anger or hatred. But if someone doesn't believe it's wrong to lie, I don't want to know them on a deep level. If someone's out doing drugs and partying all the time, that person is not able to be my friend. They're not able. One person I just got off the phone with, he once again went with his friends to they're electronic music concerts. And he took drugs again, and it's like this throws this guy off for 6 months. His consciousness just goes through the roof again, and it takes him 6 months for God to calm him down. And he said, but I've known these guys since I was a kid. And I said, well, look, you can go to lunch with them, but you can't go there. There has to be a level of morality in someone's life for me to be their friend in a deep way. I don't want to share energies. When I go home, I've got an entity on my shoulder. I don't want to be with people that bring that kind of thing into my life. I don't want that. So there's two kinds of forgiveness Jesus is talking about. One, which is the person is Christian or not, we don't care. But they're really genuinely, sincerely interested in living a level of dignity and love and responsibility in a relationship that there can be a mutual exchange of that. That's a true friendship. That's a true relationship. That is something you want to maintain. But the other one, Jesus says, let them be like a tax collector or a Gentile. And that doesn't mean you hate them, because there's no excuse to hate someone. But there is an excuse. There is a reason to have distance from somebody, to have detachment from somebody. You could love them from a distance, but you don't want to get into financial dealings with them. Maybe. You don't want to get in emotional situations with them, maybe, because they aren't capable of living that life. They're not capable. They don't want to. They don't want to. So now you don't even agree on the rules of what a connection means. And Jesus said straight out, you let them be like a tax collector or a Gentile. And so this is important, because when if you're trying to heal something with someone, especially, if you come from dysfunctional families, then there's wounds. By the time I became conscious and wanted God, every one of my important relationships was filled with pain and sorrow and anger and hurt, so much hurt. And I woke up, I didn't know the family system was profoundly dysfunctional. That took quite a long time to see. And then I became the enemy for having woken up. And I was more hated. I didn't understand it. It was shocking to me, but I was actually more villainized by the family once I woke up, not less. And it took me way too long to realize that what God wanted for me was to have a very strong detachment from them. Love them. It's easy to love someone from a distance. It's easy to love, like an abusive person is easy to love if you don't hang around for them to abuse you. You can love them so easily, but you can't set yourself in a situation like that where you're being harmed by others. That's not healthy for anybody. And we hear forgiveness from Jesus, and he means it. He means we have to forgive everybody. But there's limits. Once you know what kind of a person someone is, you shouldn't go back if you keep getting hurt by that person. And they shouldn't come back to you if you keep hurting them. And the caveat to that is it depends if both parties are genuinely, sincerely sorry and want to work through it. And then it's endless forgiveness. It's endless. Some people have been a pain in my butt in my life. I think I've been a pain in a lot of people's lives. So I'm not complaining. Some people have. My only concern is, do they want to grow towards the good and the better? And if they do, I love them. I love them. I forgive them and I love them. That's all I need to know is, are they trying to go towards the good? And if they are, that's all I need to know to say that I want that person in my life. I want them in my life. And if they aren't trying that, I'm pretty sure I don't want them in my life in any meaningful way. I don't. Okay, so, and then just on that we're politically divided now, and then there's all kinds of other issues that I mentioned. It's not just people. You have you noticed some people as they get older, they just get more and more grumpy, more and more grumpy. That all that is they just didn't keep their resentments from building. And it's easy. You look at the world, and it's Jill and I were talking yesterday. It is profoundly sinful, profoundly so. The level of sin and greed, sexual disorder, it is profound. And it's everywhere, from the educated and wealthy to the poor. It just seems to be anywhere you look. And it seems right now to be being more acceptable. There's more despicable villain type people rising to prominence and influence. Sometimes I'm shocked by who's getting interviewed. I just think, when did we start pulling from that crowd? Like, why does anyone care what they think? They're a despicable villain. They're a villain. So the world it's kind of losing. I'm not saying it's permanent, or it could just be a wave, things they ebb and flow. But right now, the level of sin and despicability in human beings is really rising. And it's becoming acceptable. It's becoming okay. And that's fine. I don't like it. Don't know what to do about it yet. I don't know if there's anything I can do or not. But I know this. I know that I cannot resent them. I can't. I can't be angry at them. I cannot fear them. I can't allow them, anything they're doing, to pollute my consciousness. I can't do that. Because we're called to union with God. We're called to love. We're called to joy. We're called to union. And I can't stop halfway there to just get off the elevator and hate people. Nor can I get off halfway there and be ashamed for the rest of my life, or feel guilty for the rest of my life. You can get distracted by that, or like my friend who's not here, you can get distracted by hanging with people who are really just playing at life and not really living a real life. There's all these ways in which you can just get lost and cease to go where you're supposed to be going. Um, Recently I had a few months of a very intense something, and they have me now down in humility. I hope. I hope I am. Hope I can do that. Um, Man, it's real. It's real. It, you resist purification because you don't know what God's trying to bring you to. You don't understand, but it's exceedingly high and beautiful. And you really have to believe that. That cannot be theoretical. You have to believe that you, personally, you, are being called to infinite love. And that maybe, just maybe, it's not as far off as you think. Maybe it's not. It One time I was sitting in prayer and feeling far away from God. Just, you know, a long ways to go. So much to do to get there. And I didn't mean to think it, but just out of nowhere, I thought, maybe I'm very close. And it just, as soon as I had that thought, I was sort of hanging with Jesus, and the Trinity, and I thought maybe I'm very close to God, or maybe God's very close to me, and just that thought, it changed everything. So the Bible is meant to give you that kind of faith. It's meant to get you to think, gosh, maybe my sin, which matters, is the small thing. Maybe the big thing is God's grace. Maybe all this that I'm clinging to is not the real thing. Maybe I've been confused about who I am, confused about what I want. And maybe it's not that far off. And there's saints who did the whole journey so quick, 4 years, 4 years. John of the Cross, 4 years, the whole thing. Maybe it isn't that far away. Why not you? Why not you? Why not let go of those things that are in the way of love? Why not just let them go? the last thing, just on this topic. It's an anecdotal story. I don't even know if it's true, but I've heard it many times. In the 60s, um, Mother Teresa met with some people, protesters, time of great upheaval. Like this time, but with more hope presently. And she was talking to these protesters, and she said, "You are allowed to protest against anything that you have forgiven." But until you've forgiven, you are poisoning the world with your protest. So I think in these divided times, don't poison the world. Don't do it. Okay, last anecdotal, the story from my life. I was doing Tai Chi in the park years ago, and I was super blissed out at the time, just ridiculously blissed out. And these guys had been heckling me. There's something about doing anything peaceful that just pisses people off. I mean, I used to go to this one park and meditate all the time and do Tai Chi, and there'd be a whole park of trees. Just I'd sit on by one tree to meditate, and if there's a noisy group, they would come. They have to come right next to you. They don't notice you. They might step on you. It's almost like they have an unconscious need to destroy the good. And so that also would happen with, you're doing Tai Chi and you're just barely moving like this fast, and there just has to be people heckling you from the cars. And so I think I yelled at them, said, probably swore at them, yeah, get lost or whatever. So that pissed them off. So now, see, he's just pretending to be peaceful. We know the truth. So now they really are justified. They got this guy to come after me. And like 2 days later, and this guy had just gotten out of prison. I don't know how these guys knew the guy, but this guy came up to me. I'm stretching at the park. There's like a railing, and I used to put my foot up and stretch for 20 minutes or so before you do Tai Chi. Then, and this guy, he came up, and he's a big guy. He's like 6'4", no shirt, big guy, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and he's yelling in my face. He's threatening my physical safety. And this was a good day. So I'm not saying I'm like this all the time or anything. It's a really good day. But what I'm trying to say is, of course I was ready to defend myself physically. Of course I was ready to fist fight this guy if I had to. Of course I was. But I didn't have to be hateful or angry to be ready to do that. So I just kept saying, God, what do you want me to do? Like in prayer, I wasn't saying it out loud, but I'd be like, hey, God, what do you want me to do? And nothing. So I just kept stretching. I mean, I don't know why I didn't do this, but I just kept stretching. I'm thinking, okay, God, what do you want me to do? Nothing, nothing, nothing. So I'm like, this is getting, pretty spooky. He's right up in my face. He's towering over me. He's yelling at me. And he said, I'm sorry. He said, I'm sorry. He said, I just got out of prison. He said, I'm on probation. And if I get into a scuffle with you and get caught, I will go back to prison. So, I mean, that's super cool. You can see me on a worse day and not be impressed. So don't be impressed. But the point I'm trying to make about it is, see, I was ready to fight. I was prepared to defend myself. But I did not have to hate him or be angry. So you don't need the toxicity. You don't need it. And honestly, the world can't afford it. There have to be people who bring light instead. It doesn't mean there isn't right and wrong. It doesn't mean some of the things that are happening in this world are deeply immoral and deeply sinful. We know that's true. It doesn't even mean you would never be called to take action based on that. But it does mean we shouldn't feed the toxicity. And that anger and hatred is toxicity. You know, Jill and I were talking about some of the, I can't listen to hardly any news commentators because they're just spewing poison constantly. And I just don't want to hear it. It's so toxic. I don't want to hear it. Mocking people and just it, even when I think they're right about their main point, but it's just pure toxicity. I don't want to partake in that. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to partake in it. I told Jill, someone else, not on a deep spiritual path, might need that pressure release, Let them have it. They're doing good in the world maybe on one level, but we don't need that. We don't need that. We're to bring light to the world. And I can't do that if I'm angry, but I also can't do it if I'm terrified or depressed. Great thing about Christianity is it shows you a way to find joy and love without pretending there's no sin in the world.